Okay, so we are now going to talk about EQ. We have this snare loop going um, in the background, and we just looked at gate. This is the next thing after gate in the input. So we've got the input that is then gated some. If we have the gate on, we can turn the gate off and just let everything through. Or we can have it on. And then the next path for that signal from the snare loop is going to be EQ. So when we're dealing with EQ on anything, we need to know two things. We need to know that on the bottom, left to right is low frequencies to high frequencies, and that on the y-axis, top to bottom, the higher you are up here with your EQ, the stronger those frequencies are going to be, and the lower, the weaker they're going to be. So if you move the EQ, if you have a wave going up and on the left side, that means that we're trying to bump the low end higher on whatever instrument we're on. So we can take an example of, let's look at bass. So this is a bass EQ. As you can see, it's a little crazy looking, but what we'll notice firsthand is, first off, is that this low end is actually cut a little bit here, and these are really low frequencies. This 20 to 40 hertz, that's really, really low. And then we bump these lows a little bit here, and then a little bit of the low mids, and then everything up here is dropped. Now you can understand with a bass guitar that it's not going to have any frequencies up here, and if it does, those frequencies are going to be just from the fingers on the strings of the instrument or some buzz that's coming through electronically. We can compare that to vocals, a little bit in that higher range. So this is the EQ for my voice. I've got a little bit more of a darker sounding voice, a little bit more resonant on the lower frequencies, and so actually cutting some of this out is helpful because it makes it less muddy and it makes it a little bit clearer, and then bringing in some of these high ends. But you also notice we don't have these crazy highs up here bumped all the way. So pretty much anything in the very, very low and the very, very high. So this goes 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, 20 kilohertz. So those frequencies are usually shied away from. There's not really any instrument on the stage that's going to be touching the very, very highest. The kick drum does get into these lower frequencies. That's where we really get that thump. So this is even lower than the bass guitar will go. And so that's where we get that kind of percussive, you can feel it from the subwoofers, thump. Now let's play around with this audio that we've got from the snare. So if you look, we've got an RTA at the bottom. That's what those blue lines are. And it might actually help to look at my vocal instead. So as you can see, a kind of constant sound is going to show here which frequencies are most prominent in my voice. So you can see that actually this lower mid to low range for my speaking voice is most prominent, and then you kind of taper off here. And so for my singing voice, we want it to be warm, but we don't want it to be overly saturated or too thick. So bringing up some of these high ends is really good. So if we look at the snare loop, this is just kind of a wall of sound, and then we've got that little spike in the lows, but it's pretty consistent across. You can kind of hear a tambourine as well with the hit. And so what we're going to do is we're going to shape some of this. So the different parts, we have a shelf here. So a shelf looks like this. Boom. You can kind of understand why it's a shelf. You can imagine like a plateau, like you're traveling and then you're up on this plateau, or like a shelf. So these are shelves. These are bells. These curves. So this is mostly what people think of. And so we've got one shelf here. We've got a high shelf over here. and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 low, mid, and high frequency bells. The other thing that's really, really useful, and this is going to be kind of the EQ, like easy quick fix. This will really clean up a sound from the beginning, is we have filters. The way you do that is that you're going to go over here, and it says filter, LC, high C, and tilt. Tilt's cool. We don't really need it, but it is there if we want to use it. So tilt is actually gonna, let's click tilt. So what tilt's gonna do is it's gonna tilt the entire EQ like this or like this. So it'll just put a shallow cut on lows and bump on highs, or vice versa. So that can be helpful for like warming something up or thinning something up, but I prefer that we use low cut, high cut, and then kind of pick out specific frequency areas by both looking at the RTA here and then listening. And so this is for the live stream audio mix. It's easier to just do this naturally because you've got your headphones on all the time. So, but for the house sound, you got to put the headphones on and listen to that to really hear those frequencies. And then you want to take them off for the final part of just making sure that you haven't bumped a frequency crazy high in the room. But it can really help you isolate some of these. Like if you were looking for this kind of thing, this little spike here, it's better in the headphones. So let's look at a low cut, and we're going to add a high cut. So these are pretty straightforward. And you've got a knob here. So low cut, we're going to move that up and down. High cut, we're going to move up and down. So the snare, I kind of like a thwack for the snare. Most worship music has a thwack. It's not a really ringy sound. It's kind of a thwack, but we do have some high end. So we don't want to cut the high end too much. And we don't want a lot of low end either, but we do want some. And so what this is going to sound like, so let me turn these cuts off. So this is the normal sound. And then we're going to add the low cut and the high cut. So if we sweep the high cut all the way to the right, you can hear more of that tambourine. And then there, you hear a little bit less of the tambourine, less highs. If we do the same with the low, there's a little bit of a rumble, and you might not be able to hear it on the video, but we don't necessarily need that. So if we sweep this, sounds like a clap. That's not what we want. So that's the high mid frequencies only coming through, and that does not sound like a snare drum. So we want some of that thwack. So this is kind of a good framing for the snare. You know, sometimes we like a little bit more high, and that's fine. But this is a good framing for the snare. It's kind of following the natural sound of the snare. So this is in the filters, and to get out of this, you just hit close. And now we're back in the EQ area. So filters are here, then EQ. So all that's part of EQ. Let's take a look at this little spike here that we've got. Let's see what that sounds like. We can use this marker, and gain refers to how much we're adding or how much we're taking away. We've used gain and trim for our overall levels before, but this would be the first time we've used it to change just specific things within frequencies of a channel. So that's gain. And then Q, one of my favorite things, is how skinny or how wide of a frequency range we're grabbing. So what's really cool about this is you can take a really skinny frequency range, you can spike it, and then you can take this knob over here and sweep the frequency. And you can find nasty frequencies that really ring and bring them down. So let's see. So we can kind of find that spike that's already naturally there and amplify it and kind of see what it sounds like. And we can decide, okay, so this is a little bit more of a mid-low frequency to low frequency. And what do we want to do with that? So we can bring the gain back down here, make the Q a little bit wider. So this is more natural sounding. Then so that's kind of amplifying that frequency. Let's bring it down a little bit. So I think we want a little bit more of that frequency rather than less. That's kind of the low end of that drum that adds that to that thwack. And we have plenty of the high. Another thing to notice is on the left here and on the right, we have that low cut and that high cut available to us. So they are up here as well, but you can just see more detail from the filter tab here. So you can trigger the low and high cut from there, and they'll just disappear. So if you take this, so you can either use the touch screen or you can use these knobs. Once you've selected, you can select over here too. So if you take number 3 here, terrible sound. So we don't want anything like that. So we can bring the gain back down. So I think this is pretty clean here. So this is what it sounds like with an EQ. This is what it sounds like without it. So in that situation, the high cut and low cut are actually making the most difference, and we get a little bit more thump, a little bit more energy from the low resonance of that snare drum recording by bumping this lower frequency here. Okay, so that's kind of how EQ works. Everything that we do is going to have a different EQ. Like vocals have different EQs, the piano. So this is a good example of something. You can kind of see the room noise in the back. The piano microphone is actually picking up my voice from the balcony. So with the keyboard or the piano here, so this is the baby grand piano, there was a frequency that we did not like. It was too harsh and it was ringing out too much and causing feedback. And so this is one of those situations where we took this one here and we spiked it with the gain all the way up. We made it really thin and we swept until we found that ringing frequency. And then we were able to drop that and cut that out. So that's really nice for things like a piano. That's an acoustic instrument that might be too harsh on some frequencies. And then also drums. The snare drum in particular can have really harsh frequencies that we can cut out just a little bit. You know, we're not bringing this all the way down, but we are dropping it pretty significantly. But we want to just pick that one out and let it work that way. The keys are another one where we have a low cut. We don't need a lot of the low end that can make it kind of muddy and busy on the stage, but we do have low mids to highs, and then there's not a lot of our keys players or piano players that are going into the highest frequencies on the keyboard anyway, and so we don't really need to cut that. And then bass is another one that we looked at earlier. So this is a good example of EQing and how we're able to do that. To the best of our ability, check the EQ. So in the last video, we checked the gate on every single thing. and that will get faster and faster. It doesn't need to take you a lot of time. You can just sweep through that threshold. And on this one, it's just checking. It should already be done for you from last time, but just check and make sure that it sounds like what you think that instrument should sound like, and that we're not cutting frequencies out that we shouldn't be. And that's going to be the main key, is that with any of these, first thing we're going to check is just make sure that we're not going overboard on the processing.